You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. It's brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons, seeing is believing. Waylead, home is where one starts from. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. DBS Industries, everything roofing, the best of it. SEMA, helping people and businesses to succeed. And we will quickly go to the last bit of the issue of the coronavirus that we are discussing. And my guests that you have been listening to give the very best of education, Dr. Justice Jansen, General Secretary, Ghana Medical Association. Dr. Kwame Sapong Asiedu, he is pharmacist and fellow, Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD, Ghana. Dr. Michael Owusu, virologist, Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research into Tropical Medicine, that's KCCR. He's also a lecturer, Department of Medical Diagnostics, KNUST, and director of the Center for Health System Strengthening in Kumasi. Martin Pebu is a rights activist, he's a lawyer, and we'll have Professor Ransford Jampo, Department of Political Science, join us in the next 30 minutes or so. So there has been this matter that has compelled Parliament to haul the Health Minister, Kweku Ajiman Menu, before an ad hoc committee that's been probing into the signing of the contract agreement between the governments of Ghana and Sheikh Ahmed Dalmouk Al Maktoum for the procurement of supply of 3.4 million of Sputnik V vaccines at a unit cost of $19 per dose, instead of what has been said, the ex-factory price, $10 per dose. Now, he's been saying a few things before the committee, and some Ghanaians have been incensed, saying either he resigns or the president should sack him. I have my doubt if any of that will happen. But let's listen to what happened.
Did you seek parliamentary approval before you entered into this contract?
No, please.
You did not.
Have you any such plans?
I thought she was going to have a follow-up question. I had plans to come to regularize the parliamentary approval, to seek for parliamentary approval after I've signed the contract.
Do you appreciate the fact that the pronouncement by the Supreme Court vis-a-vis the constitutional provision clearly talks about prior approval? You appreciate that?
Honorable Chair, very much so. But my frustrations to try to get a vaccine for us at the heat of our second wave, I relied on the Executive Instrument 61 that was passed by Parliament to hide behind emergency clauses that have been invoked, to try to see if I could do that and come to Parliament to inform Parliament that this is what I've done and therefore need regularization, I need approval to cover it. Because we were in dire need of the vaccines, and I had the onus to try to procure the vaccines to vaccinate Ghanaians to protect our lives.
But the EI is subsidiary legislation.
Honorable Chair, I must be very honest with you. At the time, I have mentioned my frustration was the fact that I seriously made that error, and on hindsight, it won't happen any longer. Madam Chair, I've explained that those were not normal times. And I was seriously in a situation that couldn't make me think properly, the way you think that now I will actually address myself to the situation.
Right. Kwame, what do you say about people's reaction to what the minister has been saying to the committee? 3 days or so of probing. What do you say?
Thanks, Samson. Interesting. I would want us to all remind ourselves of the statement that was released by the Ministry of Health when all this broke up. And if you look at that statement, it gave clear indication that the Sheikh was consulted first and foremost when all other avenues had been explored and they have proved unsuccessful. The minister went to the committee and under oath said something different. That's the first thing. Then the minister said that vaccines were not captured in their budgets because as at November, they really didn't have any plans to purchase vaccines. That's number two. Meanwhile, if you read the document, it gave the impression that Al Maktoum actually approached the ministry. But later evidence has shown that the reverse probably happened. So the first question I asked myself, even before coming to the committee, is where was the minister when that was being put out to Ghanaians? Because as it stands now, on the basis of his statement under oath, that statement is discredited. And I ask myself, so what happens to the person who put the statement out in a manner that clearly was intended to gaslight Ghanaians? Because there are so many things in that statement that the minister, under strict proof, said the contrary. So I ask myself, therefore, that how could this have happened? Was the minister in charge of his acolytes who were putting out these statements? Or was it that he had lost thread? But there's one credit I would want to give to the minister, and that is the fact that he said that he was under pressure at the time and creates the impression that he was willing to do anything to protect Ghanaians. Having given him that credit, with his level of, public service to this country, both as an MP, as ministers, as deputy minister, etc. When he was reminded about the provisions in our laws which allows for such emergencies to be addressed, he said he wasn't thinking properly. So therefore, I ask myself, in a pandemic where you need your best stops to be thinking under pressure, am I really comfortable with someone who can tell us that under those circumstances he wasn't thinking properly to be leading the charge?
Kwame, what do we want? We have a minister who shows up and you could tell from his demeanor that he's being very candid with you. And he's telling you what is supposed to be the truth. Does it matter that it contradicts statements that were put out earlier, that he's conceding and saying, I'm sorry, it won't happen again?
Yes, I'm saying it does matter. And I'll tell you why it does matter. It does matter because the statement wasn't a one-off. There were then subsequent press conferences which went to set to justify the contents of those statements. There was no cabinet approval. So yes, I give the minister credit for being that contrite. But then the question I ask myself is, if he wasn't under oath, would he have volunteered that information? That is important because we put people in public service to level up to us and give us information so that we can come to informed conclusions. They are there as our custodians, not as our lords. So if it has to take compulsion, because you are lawyers, I'm not. The minute you're under oath, you lie at the risk of perjury, which then means that you are being compelled to tell the truth. So I asked myself on the basis, and that's why I brought in that statement, the basis that that statement came from his ministry, from a senior person in his ministry, and he is now discrediting the statement. Is it that the compulsion is what is making him contrite, or his demeanor naturally should be believed? And that was what I said. I would want to leave that to the judgment of Ghanaians, because I cannot make my mind up.
Do you appreciate that, in fact, in February, March, as we have been informed, unless we don't want to believe the information from government, that all bilateral and government-to-government sources of procuring the vaccine had failed. And this man says, look, I was looking at Ghanaians, the death, the infection rates, looking at all of that, I was just desperate. He used the words, desperate. I erred, forgive me.
Yeah, yes, Samson, I get that. I hear that. But when he was put under strict proof that had everything been exhausted, it turns out that he dealt with the sheikh before they started the other exhaustive discussions. He said that under oath. If I'm wrong, I can be disproven. The statements are there. And that's why I ask myself, is it the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart? Is he telling me the truth because he's being compelled by virtue of the fact that he's under oath, or with the benefit of hindsight, having looked at everything that went on and the fact that the sheikh could not deliver and that he may have burnt his fingers, he realizes that, no, I have to level up the truth with Ghanaians so that they know the circumstances under which I was compelled to make the said decisions I made, and therefore they can temper justice with mercy and forgive. And that's what I said. I would wait for the committee to come out. I would not make a judgment either way. I would wait for the committee to come out with their report. My expectation is they will be balanced. And I say that because on both sides, the majority and the minority are people who've been in ministerial positions, who've worked under pressure. So I expect them to bring their expertise on board in the drafting of the final report, which comes to us. So we can have a balanced view, and then I can make a decision whether his contrition at the committee is something that is merit of forgiveness or is something that he has to fall on his own sword. For now, I sit on the fence on that.
Okay. Should we give some sort of weight for the report, because they finished their work and they're about to come out with the report? Should we, wait for the report, or at this time it's okay the way the public is looking at it, and some are, if you like, baying for his blood, that you don't deserve to be a minister?
And that's why I said in fact, I made a post on Facebook with that regard, and I could see the passions running very high. And the reason why I can see the passions running very high is, Samson, the minister was going to procure 3.4 million doses of vaccines at $19 each. That is south of $60 million US, a contract south of $60 million US. And someone wants to convince me that just one minister didn't take it to cabinet, didn't take it to parliament, and with all the checks and balances we have in our civil and public service, eventually got a letter of credit, especially when I've listened to the voice of the Minister of Finance in the circumstances under which the letter of credit was issued. I think there is more to this. And that is why I want to wait for the report, because there might be more people in the chain that led us to this point who have to be looked at in the eye. Do they also deserve to be there? For example, if you're a finance minister, you are a member of cabinet, the health minister is a member of cabinet. If something doesn't have cabinet approval and it comes to you, let's assume the health minister is under pressure. Let's assume he's forgotten that there needs to be parliamentary approval. Let's assume he's forgotten that it's an international contract and therefore the AG's advice must come before he goes into the argument. As another minister who is custodian of the kitty of the nation, what did you do? Did you tell him to go and seek all these things before you issued a letter of credit? All these things must come up. And that's why, yes, I can understand why people are baying for his blood, because it wasn't pretty watching his delivery and the contritions coming out. Okay. But I'd rather wait, because I think there's a chain that needs to be strung out. And once the chain is strung out, then I would want that all those along the chain are held to account.
All right. Maybe just let's treat a bit of the legal angle here before we continue with the other doctors. And I'm reading from the Graphic Online report. It says, making a second appearance before the 9-member ad hoc committee probing the contract agreement in Parliament on Monday, July 19, Mr. Juan Menu said, since he had the honors to try and procure the vaccines to protect the lives of Ghanaians, he had to rely on EI61 to procure the vaccines. Let's be frank about it. EI61 just declared that after the WHO said this is a pandemic, EI61 just came in to say we're also facing a public health crisis. It has no guidance for any procurement. Then, when the chairman of the committee, Mr. Alexander Finyomaking, asked him if he was aware that the EI was a subsidiary legislation, he answered, Honorable Chair, I must be very honest with you. At the time, my frustration was the fact that I seriously made that error. And on hindsight, it will not happen again. Then they referred to why he needed to comply. There's no cabinet approval. There's no parliamentary prior approval as required by the Graphic Online quotes Article 181, Clause 5. Article 181, Clause 5. How is that fatal in the face of a pandemic?
It still remains that law is the law. You know, at the committee, he was shown that he could have come for an urgent approval, right? Yes, so far, look, the answers are not convincing, to say the least. They are not, because you see, this is not the first mistake. You remember the ministry, he had signed an earlier one for $25, and the presidency stepped in and they canceled it. So that should have put him on notice that he was on slippery grounds. So this coming back that he was not thinking straight and that so far, that appears as an afterthought. So it does. Because look, you know, we also walk around, you will hear stuff. There are other suppliers in town, people offering the same vaccines for $12.5 per dose. Yes, people offering it for $12.5 per dose. In the ministry there. And the ministry is not willing to talk to them. And then they keep hanging on to the $19. Now, let's get it clear, Samson. People have offered at $12.5 per dose. And the ministry is not willing to talk to them and was willing to talk to the sheikh at $19. At a point, we heard the money would not be paid, now. It was supposed to be a debt that would be paid in future. But when you go into the agreement, you see that it is 50% of it is a site LC, site. So when the goods are delivered and then the seller presents the documents, yes, clause 4.2. You see, it says that the buyer, I'm reading, the buyer shall pay in advance through site LC to the seller 50% for each batch of supply as per supply order specifications, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then the second one is through a confirmed letter of credit, right? That confirmed letter, so mean that when they issue the first one, then you have to get, well, the same bank can confirm at an extra cost, or a different bank will confirm. And these LCs, usually, he can come out and show how much his cost, but usually you're looking at 0.25%. Okay, that's for the confirmation, but the original issuance, usually you're looking at about 0.5%. If you do those calculations, if we're using 0.5, which is very common in the industry, 0.5% of the 64,600,000, you're getting $323,000. That's for the LC, the site LC. Then the confirmation comes at an extra cost of 0.25, generally in that region. Extra $161,500. Saying that all of this, I mean, come on, the minister, look, that's why the beginning, a month ago when this thing first broke, I thought that the least that the minister could have done was just to have stepped aside, to have just resigned. It's not, the position is not his private property. okay? It's not his private property. There are many other persons.
The reference you made about some other, people willing to offer for $12 a dose, and, the ministry appears to prefer to still work with $19 per dose. We are hesitant and edgy sometimes to talk about these things, but you are suggesting to me that it smacks of corruption, that there's the possibility that somebody was seeking to benefit privately?
Well, when you use the word smack, I cannot run away from it, okay? Because that's for smacking, yes. To the extent that there's somebody willing to say 12.5, and you say, no, I'll not deal with you. You keep dilly-dallying. Oh, I'll meet you today, I'll meet you tomorrow, and you are busily meeting somebody for 19. Yeah, it can smack off, okay? And there are other things. That one, I'm sure the minister himself will see that it's a fair comment, because till date, he hasn't explained. In the 9th June letter, he sought to say that they were running around. Question is, look, today, there are people who can show up and show that they've been at his doors at this 12.5, and he wasn't meeting them. So when you say you are running around, saying that...
Talking about today, is it not possible to look at it from this angle? That we have come very hard on him and the government for seeking to deal with individuals rather than government to government. So he will not be interested in dealing with any individual.
No, rather, I would have thought that, as a ministry, and don't forget he has the technical advisors and all this. In these matters, he should have engaged many other of the suppliers. Because some of the suppliers, you see even in the 9th June letter that the chief director signed, they say that they couldn't establish government-to-government contract. There are some of the suppliers who claim to have direct agreements with the manufacturers. Right. And yet, the ministry is not meeting these people. Somebody comes to Ghana, he says, I have direct agreement, exclusive agreements with the Russians. Ask the minister, isn't it true that there are people in Ghana who have exclusive agreements with the Russians? And yet you not meet.
I'm familiar with that too.
Yes, you see, so it's very strange. Look, I think the least this man can do is to just go away. He should just walk away from this job. Because every day he takes on, it's as if we are bereft of talent for that position. It's as if we are bereft of talent for that position. You can't take the whole nation for a ride.
Dr. Yangston, I think now there's some glimmer of hope, because we are told that we are likely to receive about 17 million doses from J&J vaccines by end of August, something like that. Okay. So we can protect ourselves and hope that in a matter of a month, we will get something to begin to vaccinate more people, because 1.2 of the population will take us nowhere in the herd immunity that you people have been preaching.
Okay, so Samson, let me begin my answer with a question to you, respectfully. Do we have any agreement in place for the supply of this 17 million you are talking about? Or is the usual donations? I just want to be sure.
I don't know about that.
Okay, because there are two scenarios here. Where you have a contract with somebody and you are quite sure that the person will honor, and in default, you can even take some actions. When you are told that there's something coming, it's very easy for me to more or less accept that, yes, there's a deal in place, there's evidence and all that. The flip side is that we have depended on donors throughout this period by way of our vaccines. And that is one area that some of us are not comfortable with. Because, you see, when they default, you cannot hold them to any measure. They want to give you something. It is at their pleasure or their discretion. They are doing this for the sake of humanity. But for you as a country, what steps are you also taking for your people? As far as I'm concerned, we need to double our effort as a people when it comes to this whole vaccine business. We need to hasten the acquisition on our own merit. And then, lastly, we cannot continue to depend on donations or the donor community or donor states, based on their pledges. And that is one area that we think we are not doing enough for ourselves. Clearly. Because, you see, the hopes of people are being raised all the time. And unfortunately, the truth is that people are not seeing the vaccines. This morning, 3 people called me and said, Doc, so are you sure that these vaccines will come? I can only encourage them and give them hope. But the truth is that the supply does not depend on us. The American government has promised that they have excess, they will give some to us. If they default, what are we going to do? So for me, the state should relook everything that it has done regarding this vaccine business, because that is one of the surest way to protecting us. It is so clear that COVID is not over, the world over. The third waves are happening, whether it's Asia, whether it's America, whether it's Europe, Africa, we are seeing it. So we clearly need to understand what is happening and do the best we can for ourselves. What others will give us, whether it's through the COVAX platform or promises from the Americans or the Europeans, would then just be a top-up. Countries like Israel were very purposive and went in for what they think will be good enough for their country. They planned way ahead. And it looks like there's a certain inertia or failure on our part when it comes to this vaccine business. And we really need to relook the way things are being done. So, Samson, and we can only hope.
And there's also further hope, is there not? When we were told in the course of this week that the South African pharmaceutical company Aspen has begun production of hundreds of millions of doses of the COVID-19 vaccine for African countries. To speed up the process, the company is getting a large funding boost from the US government. And speaking at a briefing on Thursday, Mark Marchik, a top executive for the US International Development Financial Corporation, said Aspen would receive about $712 million to produce vaccines for the people in Africa. So that's also good.
Samson, in one breath it's good news, but in another I'm worried. Again, the whole African continent, we are going to depend on another country, America, to come fund 700 million. The contract before us, what was the total? 64 million. And that was not even good enough for all our needs in terms of the numbers I mean. The Sputnik thing we are talking about, 64. Yeah. The Americans are going to provide 700 million. Look at the bigger African population. And then the practical issues that we are facing now will also come to haunt us. For example, when things got to a head, the Indians were not ready to export. And rightly so. Which government will want to send the much needed, vaccine when his or her people are dying? So if South Africa sets the example of producing these vaccines, that does not necessarily translate into a rapid and regular supply of vaccines for us as well. It is just that we have not put our house in order. Look, ECOWAS as a group by now should have been able to have at least one plan sitting in the community, funded by probably the ECOWAS states, that can produce these things. We have the human resource. It is just that we seem to not to be planning so well, and at the end of the day, we will still want to depend. The over-reliance on others, I think, is one problem that we need to ensure we resolve ASAP. Because COVID doesn't seem to be something that is going to end now. Beyond that, there are other things that could also happen. Right. We need to put our house in order.
Yes, Dr. Osu, we've been waiting and waiting. We've been told about deadlines, postponed over and again. But does it not appear, however unfortunate, that a third wave is showing its head before we are now getting to these hopes? But is it not still something we can hang on to? For example, the World Bank just 2 days ago announced a partnership with the African Union to finance the acquisition and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines for 400 million people in Africa. It's the World Bank Managing Operations Director, Alex van said that the World Bank is providing $12 billion to not only acquire but deploy 400 million doses of J&J vaccines, a single dose shot, in support of the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Tax Team, that's the AVAT initiative. And they say the announcement comes a day after African finance ministers and the World Bank Group met to fast-track vaccine acquisition on the continent to avoid a third wave.
Well, something for a number of, I think even now we have over 20 African countries which are currently in the third waves, a number of them. And if you look at the deaths across Africa, most of these are occurring in those countries, Uganda, Kenya, part of around South Africa, Namibia and its colleagues. Within Central Africa, they are also reporting cases.
Yeah, some have actually gone into lockdown.
It is good, and we always, yes. So we just will have to hope that these vaccines are coming for us to be able to protect the ordinary populace. But for me, the key thing is about resourcing our scientists and then establishing vaccination production centers in country. And this is what I think we will have to focus on. I know government has started this, engaged some universities, including Kenya University, and then Legon, University of Health and Allied Health Sciences, to put together some document and to put together resources that will enable us to proceed on this path. We've had a number of these promises over the time. And now I'm also aware that even for the Western countries, people are looking at taking a third dose. I mean, this is likely to become like the influenza virus, which will constantly mutate. And every time it mutates, you will need an upgraded version of the vaccine to be able to help you get some long-lasting immunity. So don't be surprised that even if these vaccines become available and antibody tests show that immunity is waning for those who have received their 2 doses, they may be rechanneled back to those countries to enable them to be protected. So it's not that simple. But then if you have your own in-country resources and you are able to produce and manufacture for your own people, this will be a sure way of promising your people that, yes, you are going to get 20 million and you know definitely that it will come. So I think we just will have to, embrace this as good news for us. But I will also wish that most of this funding should be channeled to countries to enable them resource and to build centers of excellence for vaccine production. Just using the money to procure vaccines across different parts of the country within this phase of the pandemic. When this goes away, what else? We've been through Ebola in Africa, Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, which caused about 11,000 deaths. It took quite a number of some months and years for us to get vaccines for these countries, which has almost cut off this Ebola from places like Guinea and Liberia. Now we have coronavirus, and you can be sure that in the next 5 to 10 years, we are likely to have another possibly zoonotic virus that may have a high level of virulence than this. If we don't begin to look locally within our own resources and to have something that will protect us and help us deal with these emerging trends of viruses, I think we're going to find it very difficult. So I'll be happy we get these vaccines, but my wish and hope is that these partners will rather resource our own universities and our own research centers and give them that lifting. Give them that kind of leverage for them to engage in the core science of vaccine production and to also be able to get money to go from the basic science to the deployment of vaccines and get this across. That is where I think we should focus on as a country and get people to help us to deal with.
Thank you so very much. Dr. Michael Owusu, Virologist, Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research into Tropical Medicine, KCCR. Say hi to Dr. Mwesi for us. Thank you all for helping educate people with the information that is needed so that we can all be alert and protect ourselves. Kwame, do you have a word, a minute?
Yes, something. All I would say is I agree entirely with Michael. If you get money and you use the money to buy without investing in your supply chain, you are not achieving anything. So African countries must learn that we need to invest in the supply chain. And investment in the supply chain starts with the scientists Then it starts with the training of the research and development teams. Then you move on to training the pharmaceutical teams and ensuring that you can have ISO-specified production of these vaccines. It's a long chain, but with this money, we can do it. I think we need to start now. There's so much that has happened that tells us that if we don't start, we are hurting ourselves.
Thank you very much, Kwame Sapong Esiedu. Dr. Justice Yangson and Martin Pebu will stay with us. They will be joined shortly by Professor Ransford Jampo, Department of Political Science, University of Ghana, who is seeking to be elected as the Secretary of UTAG, University of Ghana, to look at the questions of the President's travel and the cost. You know, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa brought the matter up to us and told us about the millions that were going in to fund the President's trip that he made recently in what is supposed to be the most luxurious of presidential or jets, and gave the finance minister some 2 weeks notice to come and speak to the matter. He unfortunately didn't do that. Asked for more time. Now it's been a month and the finance minister shows up again and points to national security. Where do we go from here? We'll be right back.